Hello, my name is Parker,
And my name is Ned.
and this is The Force Unlimited, increasingly yet another Star Wars Unlimited podcast. I feel like there's been 3 new podcasts launched or announced since we recorded our last episode. Ned, I hope you brought math tonight. We really need and rely on that math to kind of establish our brand, distinguish us from the competition.
I've got numbers. It's
Okay.
great. As you can tell by my wizard hat, I feel like I'm bringing some powerful arcane mathemagics.
Oh man, I love mathematics. I love the arcane. This is episode number 5. We are recording December 23rd, so happy Festivus. Tomorrow's going to be Christmas Eve, so from Ned's family and mine to all of you, dear listener, and your family, Merry Christmas. And we are going to be releasing this episode about 18 hours early so that we can hopefully be your first Star Wars Unlimited content for 2024. So happy New Year, a toast. To success.
Us.
To us.
Yes, to us.
That is cheap. Ned, I got a joke for you.
Oh man, I love jokes.
You love jokes? All right. A lawyer says to a professor, "Let's dress up for our New Year's Eve episode."
That's the joke?
That's the joke.
Yeah.
That's the whole joke. Dear listener, if you are visually impaired, I am wearing 2/3 of a 3-piece tux, and Ned is wearing a wizard hat that says Happy New Year.
Yeah.
So we might need to coordinate on that, but I actually think it speaks to our personal brands really well.
I also have a noisemaker.
Ooh. You lie. You have a thing that shoots out paper.
It made noise once. Yeah.
Okay. So as with all of our episodes before this, we play one game just to kind of get ourselves right immediately in the mindset of Star Wars Unlimited. Ned, tell us about the match we just played.
But of course. So Parker was playing a blue Vader control deck, and I was playing a double yellow Thrawn tempo deck. And I think that I failed in role assignment there, where I had been doing a lot of testing against Sabine decks on Force Table, because those are really easy to test against. And so I was trying to be the beatdown, but not trying hard enough. I definitely should have mulliganed my opening hand, because it wasn't quite aggressive enough to lay the pressure on you while you were still developing. And in the late game, I couldn't do anything against like your huge, powerful come into play units. It doesn't matter that I exhaust them; they're just massive, and
they're just disgusting.
I can't exhaust them with Thrawn. Yeah.
Yeah. So I won.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm very. I picked a blue Vader deck just because blue and red, from a control standpoint, are very much the aspects of removal, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating because red is really good at early removal. You have cards like Force Choke that, I mean, sure, draw a card, I'll deal with that later, but I'm going to establish, presence now. And then you got the Avenger as always.
That was backbreaking. Yeah.
I love that card. I think that's probably up there with my favorite card. So blue, just absolutely. I thought I was a green player, but healing and removal, I don't think I have a happier aspect. I am being tempted by the dark side. When they first announced the aspects, I was very clearly going to be heroism, but increasingly, I think this game really solidified for me. I think I'm falling. I think I'm gonna. Sign up with the Sith.
Not to be too rude about it, but I think that a lot of the dark side cards that have been spoiled have a lot more just oomph to them than the comparable light side cards.
Yeah, my understanding is that's historically a bit of an FFG, Fantasy Flight problem, and I'm hopeful that it's not. Sabine seems to be dominant, so I don't think it's a problem for heroism. But I think all of the heroism decks seem to be situations where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That it's this very synergistic, powerful set of good stuff, as opposed to no card seems to say, for me with heroism, I will sacrifice everything to play that card in my deck. It's all, this is good stuff in the deck that I want to play. And I love good stuff, but evil also seems to have a lot of good stuff. All right, let's get into it.
All right, today we're going to be talking about Sabine. No, but seriously, we're going to be talking about Quadrant Theory. Are you familiar with Quadrant Theory, Parker?
I am. And Ned, you and I have a tendency to run a little long with these podcasts. So I think I've got this. I'm going to use edit and post magic. Let's put 30 seconds on the clock because I
All right.
think I can summarize Quadrant Theory in 30 seconds, and then we can just skip to the math and deliver a short episode. So
I love the math. Let's go.
here we go. There are 4 quadrants. The first one is the Alpha Quadrant. It has Earth and the other Federation powers like the Vulcans and the Andorians and the Tellarites, and then also happens to have the Cardassians introduced in TNG. You've got the Beta Quadrant, home to the Klingons and the Romulans and all the other lesser story species like the Breen. You've got the Voyager Quadrant of the Delta. Nobody cares about that except for that's where the Borg are. And then you've got the Gamma Quadrant with the Wormhole, the Founders, and the Dominion. 30 seconds. Done.
I mean, that was a beautiful encapsulation of the stellar geography of Star Trek, but I'm
Those are the
afraid
only
that we're
quadrants I
talking
know.
about the quadrant theory of card evaluation.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been drinking champagne then. Okay. I'm excited then for card evaluation because I constantly see these spoilers. I'm like, that looks awesome. I want to play that card. And then everybody else says, that's draft chaff. And I say, I don't understand why because it looks good. So let's find out, why are cards good?
So the idea about quadrant theory is that card evaluation is really hard. Even people who are professional, like card game players, they will look at things coming out of a set and they will have a hard time figuring out what cards are going to be good or not. And just, from a scientific standpoint, it's really easy to trick your brain. You look at something and it tickles the right kinds of neurons and you go, oh, this is going to be great. And you tell yourself stories about how awesome it's going to be, and then it ends up being kind of crummy. Or, vice versa. There are cards that look kind of unassuming, but in the right shell, in the right format, they really come together. So this tool that people have developed, it's similar to the idea of advantage theory, where it's not going to tell you everything, but it's a good first pass to understand, is this card going to do something in decks? So there are 4 circumstances that you want to think about when you're talking, and these are the 4 quadrants. Is when the game is opening, at the start of the game, is this card good? When you're ahead, is this card good? When you're losing, is this card good? And when you're tied, is this card good? And it's important to note that not every deck is going to place equal emphasis on all 4 of these quadrants. And not only that, but also you're going to be evaluating cards using quadrant theory roughly in a vacuum. Like, you can bring a little bit of extra stuff into it, but fundamentally you're asking just this card, and if you consider this card in like a reasonable supporting shell but not a magical crystal land scenario, does this card seem to work? Now, there are a bunch of
But we're
cards
in
that
magical Christmas land, Ned. It is.
We are in
Christmas.
magic. Yeah.
So when you say certain decks care more or less, like a control deck
Yeah.
might care a lot about losing because it's going to spend so much of the beginning of the game on the back foot.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And when you say in a vacuum, you're just saying don't consider the context of, are there other good Imperial cards that could make this card good? Just, is this card good? But the supporting shell is, wow, FFG is really pushing troopers in this set 3 with the Clone Wars. So I can assume I have a fair amount of trooper support.
Right.
Okay.
And I mean, you can consider, when you're talking about a vacuum, it's not a pure vacuum, right? Like, to jump ahead a little bit, general taggy, you can assume like, okay, maybe I have some other troopers in my deck, and that's one of the keys about doing this kind of analysis is you ask yourselves, do I get paid off if there's a requirement on a card, am I getting paid off for meeting the requirement on the card, or how hard is it to meet the requirement to get paid off? So another thing that's important to note about quadrant theory is, outside of the fact that in the opening we are caring about how expensive a card is, because an expensive card generally isn't good in the opening, but we're not taking a lot of curve considerations into account. And so if you're looking at this, you're going to tend to
that's the in a vacuum where we assume we have put other good cards around it to curve.
Exactly.
Into.
Yeah. Right, so you're going to end up with a lot of like 7 and 8 cost cards that look good. Like they will pass this evaluation, and you'll say, "Wow, these are good cards," and there's a reason, because they cost 8.
Because they cost 8.
So
but you just can't. Yeah. You just can't magically shove 42 8 cost cards into your deck, and that's
you will
bad.
be sad. Yeah.
They may individually be good, but that's a bad deck.
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So again, it's a rough theory. And to call out, this theory was originally developed, to the best of my knowledge, by Louis Scott Vargas and Marshall Sutcliffe on the Limited Resources podcast, which got hosted by Star City Games for doing Magic card evaluations. They do.
Is he that LSV guy you're always referring to?
That is LSV. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is LSV. Yeah.
You always talk about him, and I never know who that is.
He's
So
good.
okay. No, I
that
believe
is Louis
it.
Scott Vargas. Yeah.
He came up with the theory, and he's being referenced by other podcasts, so that's good.
So yeah, shout out to them. I don't want to get burned. For those of you who haven't watched the 4-hour H Bomber Guy YouTube plagiarism scandal video, I don't want to get caught up in that. So I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that we're referencing and fully acknowledging the sources of this insight.
Yeah.
I'm just applying it in a new context.
All of our stuff is just stuff that already exists applied to SWU. We are doing nothing novel until at least late spring.
Yes. So, are you ready to get sunk into the Alpha Quadrant?
Yeah, I am. So that would be, you said OWLT, but
yes,
we should refer this as towel, TOWL, which I think.
So towel isn't easy to remember, but starting off with the tide is a little like, I like to start off at the opening. It seems tidier, but I hear
that's
you.
Strong. I would also like to remind you we live in Portland, which is mildly famous for having 5 quadrants. So if we could come up with something that starts with E, we could genuinely just refer to this as the towel theory, and then it could be ours.
I'll keep that in mind.
So start working on a way we could evaluate card goodness that starts with E. So but let's do it your way. Opening, all right, because that's more
for right now.
interesting.
Sorry, opening. So a card that is good in the opening, the first rule about a card being good in the opening is you have to be able to play it. So if a card costs a lot of resources, it is not good in the opening because you cannot play it. There are exceptions to this. If a card costs a lot of resources, but it has some kind of like discard from your hand ability to do something. So
which we now imagine is non-hypothetical. That exists.
Right. Bamboozle is not that, is you're cheaping out by 2. Yeah. But you want to make sure that you can play it in the opening. Another thing that you need to keep in mind about cards that are good in the opening is that cards that are good in the opening need to be useful in a lot of different circumstances, because generally in the opening of the game, you don't know the way that the game is going to go. Now, you have some control over it. If you're the aggro deck, if you're the beatdown, as we referenced in our last episode, you're pretty sure that you are going to be attacking, right? If you are a control deck, you are going to be controlling. But if you're a mid-range deck, you
could go either way, and even if or you're the mirror match, you don't know how that's going to play out. So
yes,
okay.
So 2 cards that I think of as being really emblematic of good opening cards are Greedo and Regional Governor.
Okay, cheap, so that's good.
Yep, 1 and 2 costs. Greedo, 1 cost I actually think is a little bit of a downside on Greedo, because if you think about your first turn, you'll generally have 2 resources. And it's hard to pair Greedo with another 1-cost unit so that you're getting sort of full value out of all of your resources.
I mean, if you're a full aggro deck, you probably are stocking tons of 1s.
Sure. But in a more tempo deck, this is a situation I've encountered a lot, is I play a lot of yellow decks that aren't necessarily complete aggro, and in those yellow decks, you're not playing Greedo on 3 with another 2-cost comes up more frequently than playing him on turn 1.
So, follow-up question about your vacuum.
Yes.
Star Wars Unlimited has leaders. Are we allowed to kind of evaluate this card as good, mindful that there are, for example, an Imperial that costs 1 slots right into Tarkin. You never have to worry about that. I mean, you
absolutely should take that into account. Is that you should take into account the circumstances in which you are going to play the card, and the fact that Greedo is not an Imperial, like that is a mark against them.
Right.
On the other hand, they are a 3-power 1-cost unit, and so they can really lay the beat down. And not only are they 3-power 1-cost, but their on defeat ability is honestly just good. Milling yourself a single card is not that much of a disadvantage, and even if you have like a 20% chance to deal 2 damage to a unit, you are probably trading up.
Yep. No. I don't like seeing Greedo. Greedo for me is emblematic of the unique kick, that little bump that you get because you look at something like Death Star Stormtrooper, which is a 1/3 non-unique, costs 2 resources, unique, and only 1 aspect. No, not 2 resources, 2 aspects. Greedo bumps down that. That unique kick for Greedo is just very non-trivial.
It's significant, And
Okay.
then regional governors, I wanted to call out, you might say regional governors aren't generically useful because you have to name a card. And that's true, but you get to name a card. You can name
Right.
any card, right? You get to see your opponent's leader and maybe what they do if they go before you. So you
If
probably
you're
have
meta literate,
yeah.
you have a reasonably good chance of understanding what you're scared of in an opening hand when you're
Right.
facing Thrawn green. You say, okay, well, what's
Exactly.
in Thrawn green in this meta? And so, okay.
Right, and then the regional governor is also the stat line of 1/4. It's not threatening your opponent, but also if your opponent is playing another 2-cost unit, those frequently have a stat line of 2/3, and so a 2/3 is not going to be able to take this out in a single attack. So you have a chance to let it live for a little bit longer. And
Okay,
it's
so
also an
mindful
Imperial.
that
Yeah.
any card north of 3 is probably bad from an opening standpoint just because you can't
Yes.
play it. What are cards that cost 3 or less that are bad in an opening, that are cheap enough that you could play,
Yeah.
but you don't want to?
General Taggy, I think, is the biggest call out here. General Taggy is a 2-cost 2/2 that, when played, gives an experience token to each of up to 2 trooper units. So, General Taggy, if you're playing him as a 2/2 for 2, you are not getting paid off. That's it. That's a 1-cost stat line. So you really need 1 or 2 other troopers around them, and it's going to be difficult to have that be the case on turns 1 or 2 of the game. You're just not going to have 2 troopers because there hasn't been enough time. And you can get Magical Christmas Land, and again, this is why I caution people about Magical Christmas Land evaluation. But imagine that you're playing like a red, green, black deck. Darth Vader or
If you have
something.
3 troopers in
Yeah.
your opening 2
Yeah.
turns that all cost 1, yeah, he's
Yes.
incredible. 5 for
Oh, yeah.
5 stats for 2 but that's Magical Christmas Land.
That's exactly Magical Christmas Land.
Okay.
And it's going to depend on the number. Like, if there are enough 1-cost troopers that is no longer Magical Christmas Land, then Taggy goes up in evaluation.
Right.
Another
Right.
card that I play a lot, and maybe I shouldn't, but is bad early, is Waylay. So Waylay, it's 3 resources, it's pure card disadvantage, it's tempo advantage, but typically speaking, you are trying to play Waylay on like a mid to late turn of the game where you're returning a large unit to your opponent's hand so that they cannot replay it immediately. If I'm spending 3 resources and a card to bump your Death Star Stormtrooper back to your hand, as I noted back when I talked about Waylay, about tempo advantage, it's just not a good proposition.
I'm glad that you brought that up because the Waylay is present for me in a constant decision. It's without maneuver.
Right.
Waylay and outmaneuver, both 3-cost yellow events. I feel like unless you're really running like a really heavy event deck, 2 3-cost events is pricey because you're pushing
Yes.
out 3-cost units. And so that balance of how many outmaneuvers, how many Waylays do you run in a yellow deck, I think. Because they are, I think, good
Yeah.
without spoiling the next 3 evaluation methods, just based on the prevalence with which I see them in decks on the Swoot EV hot decks.
They're good.
They're good cards,
Yeah.
but which do you take? So, anyways, okay. So,
Yeah.
but bad for the opening, so it fails that match.
Bad for the opening. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's it for opening. So
Okay, so that's
if
opening.
We're following.
So
Yeah. The W is next.
So if you're already
Or
winning,
Yes.
now before we even so, I hear the term bandied around win more, right?
Yes.
The cards that are good when you're winning. Can a card that is, how much value is that metric? I always hear win more spoken of disparagingly.
Yeah, and you're right. There is a distinction between cards that are good when you're winning and cards that are win more, although a lot of these cross over. So the perfect card that is good when you are winning is a card that as soon as you play it ends the game. Right? Like it is a card where I have an advantage, I can now take that advantage and immediately end the game. Or get as close as possible to ending the game.
Or lock it, just like lock it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that it's not gonna run away from me. Whereas a win more card, you're taking a space where you have advantage and you're giving yourself more advantage.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
But you're not necessarily closing out the game. You're just further running up the score in a particular column that you already have. To go back to the accounting analogy of advantage theory, if you're running up the score in an advantage that you already have, but you're not necessarily winning the game, it looks cool, but you're not doing what you're supposed to be.
You got to close it out.
You got to close it out.
So okay, all right. So
So-
what is a card that is good when you are winning, but not necessarily a win more, but good when you are winning card look like?
I would say Relentless is perhaps the key example of this. Is that when you so Relentless is a 9-cost 8/8 in green black, and it says the first event played by each opponent each round loses all abilities, which is a fancy way of saying your opponent has to throw away a card if they want to play an event. They have to spend 2 events. So it is really protecting your pricey Star Destroyers, your pricey advantage board state for being takedowned, or even more hideously, it's really hard to fit an overwhelming barrage in against a Relentless once it's on the battlefield, because once it's in an arena, because what are you going to do? You're going to throw something else, and then especially if you're playing overwhelming barrage out of faction, which I see more and more. 7 cost, it's hard to squeeze another event in at 7 cost to be able to do something and get your value.
So okay, I want to follow up on
Yeah.
Relentless, just from the standpoint of, I feel like maybe Relentless might be the opposite example of Waylay, in that Waylay, bad in your opening, but generally considered to be a pretty good card.
Yes.
So a card can excel at one of these quadrants,
Yes.
and yet by virtue of the other quadrants maybe be bad.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, that is one thing that you need to keep in mind, is that we are trying to look at things in isolation, and then after you look at each element in isolation, you try and piece the whole back together to get a sense of overall, is this card good?
And that's still just first pass, right? Okay, so because I see Relentless spoken of disparagingly.
No, I think that Relentless,
but it's a fantastic card
not.
if you are winning and you have 9 resources to spare. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. If you are winning and you have 9 resources, Relentless is great. How often that circumstance comes up? We have to consider how good a card is when you're winning, but to go back to the whole advantage theory, you're not spending an equal amount of time in all 4 quadrants. And so cards that are good when you are winning are less attractive than cards that are good in other circumstances.
Okay.
But you have to look at it. Another card that's good when you're winning, I think, is the lightsabers, especially if you can put them on their bearers. So like Vader's lightsaber, assuming that you have Darth Vader in play,
good chance you're up
immediately. Yeah, you are probably up. It immediately deals 4 damage to a ground unit, and it turns Vader from being a combat monster to an extreme combat monster that's probably going to close out the game. Same story with Luke Skywalker. And these are cards where they're cheap. The 2 cost for the lightsabers. You're not counting the cost of the bearer, obviously, but at 2 cost, theoretically you could pretend, like, if there was if there was like a 2 or a 1 cost Luke Skywalker in some universe, then slap him on.
Okay. Would you say that's are you focusing mostly on just the lightsabers with bears, or also the other 2 that we have so far, Jedi and Fallen?
The other 2 I think count as well, where the Fallen lightsaber and the other, they just like add enough stats on a bearer and give a pretty good effect that I think that you could probably, if you're throwing them on a force unit, you can close games out pretty quickly, and that's the ideal behind these cards, is that you want to be able to close games out quickly when you
transition from winning to win. So okay,
exactly.
Any others?
Change of Heart. So I know a lot of people aren't a big fan of Change of Heart, but Change of Heart is perfect in games where you are ahead, your opponent is just starting to stabilize, and you Change of Heart to grab their big Sentinel unit or some other big unit. You just hit them in the face with it.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not good in most other circumstances. I am looking forward to a time where we have enough, damage your own, hurt your own units for value cards that Change of Heart becomes useful, because I'm a big fan of that mode of play. But for right now, it's a card that's good when you're winning. Okay. Is it good in other quadrants? I don't know. We're not talking about those right now.
We're not talking about other quadrants. But but to the point of the shell, so you're saying this card could be good if a shell of, say, sacrifice existed, but a sacrifice shell does not exist in SWU. There isn't enough ability to ensure that the card is not handed back to your opponent. So
exactly. So it's without the shell, it is okay when you're ahead, right? Like you are specifically playing it in these circumstances. I am an aggro deck. My opponent has just stabilized. I am going to change a heart their big guy, and they will not stabilize.
I'm
They
winning.
will
I
not
have
be
6
stabilized anymore.
resources. Good
Yeah.
card. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
What are bad examples?
Bad examples. Academy Defense Walker, I think, is a real standout here. So it's a 6-cost blue-black unit. It's a 5/5 with Sentinel, and it has a when played, give an experience token to each friendly damaged unit. And, you know, if you're like me, you saw this, you look at Krennic, your little brain wheels go, and you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm going to have, like, my Scout Bike Trooper and my refugees, and I'm going to have
I'm
these
nothing
giant
like you, Ned,
unit-
but my head also went there. So maybe I'm more like you than I care to admit. So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but, you know, you are depending on a board circumstance where you have a whole bunch of damaged units, and you're playing a 6-cost 5/5. Like, how many units worth of value do you need for this to be good? I would argue like maybe 2 or 3 were damaged units on the board, and then
But a
you're not
boatload of
even
damaged units does not imply winning.
right. And not only does it not imply winning, but also let's say that you do this. Let's say that you get paid off. Let's say that you have, you know, Krennic and this and Scout Bike Trooper and a bunch of other stuff on the battlefield, and you're in the arena, and you throw this down, and you're able to give like +1/+1 to like 4 different units. Okay, are you can you win now?
Right.
You know,
Okay.
maybe marginally more than you could before. You got all these units that have like extra experience tokens on them, but you're not going to be able to close the game out.
So this might be a win more example.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Another one, I feel like Wedge Antilles. He's a 5-cost green heroism card. That's a 5/5, and gives each friendly vehicle +1/+1 and ambush. So I think that the big problem here with Wedge is that he is a 5-cost unit. He buffs vehicles, which tend to be expensive, and then the keyword that he gives them, ambush, is not useful when you're ahead. Right? Like when you're playing it's less useful when you're ahead.
Okay.
It's less useful when you're ahead. You know, if he gave your vehicles, let's imagine he gave your vehicles overwhelm, right? Let's pretend that. If he's giving your vehicles overwhelm, and you drop, I mean, home one isn't that exciting, but maybe like one of the snow speeders, and you're able to ambush and you know, a lot of the snow speeders already have ambush, so you ambush in the snow speeder, it's got +1/+1 and overwhelm, and it's suddenly able to like kill your opponent's unit and deal them damage. You can make an argument for him, but it gives ambush. So let's say you give home one ambush. Okay, you have given home one ambush, it deals some amount of damage to your opponent and restores you, which is great, and it gets you a card back.
It doesn't do any damage to your opponent because you can't ambush into base. So
yes, exactly, right.
So it's purely
so
just
it's healing
more
damage to
locking
your
damage.
base.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So Wedge Antilles is not good when you're ahead. He may be good in other cases, and I'm looking forward to trying to find builds for Wedge Antilles because I like vehicles. But I just don't think that right now, given the cards around that we can see, Wedge passes the quadrant test. And of course, this is going to vary a lot. Like, you can imagine maybe there's going to be a speeder bike stack in some period in the future where there's a whole bunch of cheap speeder bikes, and then you've got Wedge Antilles at the top of your curve. But even so, okay, you drop Wedge Antilles at the top of your curve, he gives your speeder bikes ambush, which, okay, now you have to play more speeder bikes to get advantage from that.
Okay. So,
you know, maybe there's
getting
a
dangerously
circumstance.
close just to saying that Wedge is bad, period.
I will not. I refuse.
Okay.
So, now we're on to cards that are good when you're losing.
Okay, great.
So,
this is what I need.
Yeah.
I need the deck full of
I would say after the last game, this is more what I need. But
that's fair. Yeah, okay.
A card that is good when you are losing is going to turn around a bad situation. Cards that are good when you are losing are hugely valuable, because when you are losing, you need to not lose if you're going to win. So you want to give like extra points to cards that are good when you are losing. And the important thing about when you are losing is that generally your board state has not progressed as you want. So when you normally do your magical Christmas lens shenanigans, you can do less of that, right? Because you're losing. So you do not have the units on your board that you want. So let's keep that in mind when we're evaluating.
Well, arguably, the magical Christmas land for these cards is when you are totally hosed, right? Like when you're really screwed. So then. You know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So card number 1, I think, is Overwhelming Barrage. So Overwhelming Barrage is not as good as I would like in the card that does this thing, because it requires that you have something largish on the board. You know, if I had my druthers, I am a strong believer in every game needs sweepers. I have not seen a sweeper spoiled, like where a sweeper is a single card that out of nowhere does a bunch of damage to or destroys a bunch of units on the board. And those are really helpful for control decks to be able to stabilize.
Well, I mean, similarly to Overwhelming Barrage, Palp doesn't require. I mean, but Palp's much higher curve. So,
Yes, that's the thing. Is Palp is 8, and I think Palp is another card that's great when you're losing. You drop
but if you're
Palp,
losing, there's
you
a good
get
chance you might not be at turn 7.
at 8. Right. Yeah. So that this is the tension, and I mean, I think Fantasy Flight has made interesting calls here, but one of the things is that there's not a lot of multi-target removal available that we've seen at lower costs, and so control decks really have to work to survive to 8. They can't just completely, you know, to pull a little bit of Magic context into this. Magic decks, you have like this idea that probably you are going to be able to sweep the board on 4, so your opponent needs to try and kill you before turn 4, if they are playing an aggro deck, or they need to be able to survive you sweeping the board on turn 4. Where we don't see that here, the sweep is coming, you know, Overwhelming Barrage, or another examples are like Mace Windu or Han Solo, where they're coming out of nowhere, cleaning up one or a bunch of units and leaving some material behind. Leaving the material behind is also a big part of it, so that you have something to work with. So those are cards that are good when you're behind.
What makes Mace better than other ambush cards, right? So Mace doesn't just ambush. He has the potential to ambush many things.
Exactly.
But is the assumption just that but if you're losing, you don't have, I feel like you don't have a lot else you can be doing, right? Like the trick with Mace is get them to exhaust everything and tie out the turn, and then wham, Mace. But you know, Mace runs into something and they readies, and then they know that, so they're just going to start throwing things at Mace.
No, and I think that there's a reason why, in addition to the color combination that he's in, I think that Mace doesn't see a lot of play. Is that, you know, he's not. For my money, I would rather have Palpatine than Mace. You know, Mace, I think, again, in a magically Christmas Land scenario, you're dealing 5 to a bunch of units. You're trying to stabilize against Sabine. You've made it to turn 7. You throw down. You know, they've done their whole thing. You've like putzed around or whatever. You drop Mace on 7, and then you just clean up 4 or 5 units. That's the dream, and maybe you get to live it.
Yeah, I just don't think a heroism red deck is going to ever resource 2/7.
I feel like there is going to be a heroism red blue control deck at some point. I don't think that now is necessarily when you have the cards for it, but I think that that will exist at some point.
I hope so. That was my first thought with Cassian. I immediately went to blue Cassian. This idea of grab cards. Yeah,
that was where I went as well. I just couldn't quite get it to work.
Yeah, I don't know that I want Mace in that deck. Like even then, I don't know that it makes it good. So okay, so those are the cards that are good when you're losing. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of cards. This is fish in a barrel, but give me some cards that are bad when you are losing.
Most cards are bad when you're losing, or at least they're fine, right? Like
if you're losing, fine's not going to cut it. You have to turn the game.
Exactly. Okay. So I think that a card that you love very much that is not good when you're losing is Avenger. And Avenger reads like it is good when you're losing because you play it and your opponent has to destroy a unit. The problem is generally when you're losing, your opponent probably has more than one unit on the board. Now, that's not always true, right? Like you could be losing against an opponent who has like some lightsaber tricked out non-leader Luke that's just like stunting over all of your guys, and that's their only unit that they've got left on the board, and then you drop Avenger, and because it's non-leader Luke, you eliminate them. But frequently your opponent's going to have
enough to
stop. Yeah.
As an aside,
and
the play around with Avenger, I mean, just to sing Swoo's praises, the play around of I've got to get Avenger to play at a moment where you don't have Garbo to sack is such an enjoyable like sequencing decision of I've got to get rid of this tiny little card so that I can attack with Avenger to get you to get rid of your big card, but just that back and forth. I know, that I know. You're trying to do the same math. How do I get another Garbo card in before Avenger attacks? So,
Yeah.
What else? Give me one more.
Redemption is something that I feel is not that great because, again, you don't have a lot of control over your board state when you're playing Redemption. So,
But Redemption's a heal 8. I mean,
yeah,
by virtue of what it does, you have to have taken 8 damage to your base and
Sure.
or units.
so
that
it's buying
feels
you
losing.
time.
Okay.
Right. So it's buying you time, and I think that that's one of the big questions: is how much is Redemption buying you time worth? I'm coming from a perspective where in Magic, generally buying time is not good. Like if you're behind on board, you're going to keep getting behind on board. Like life gain is for chumps.
Right.
You want to be.
That feels like a personal attack. But I get that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Redemption, the life gain, I actually think is pretty good.
Yeah.
But it's only good if you're attempting to stable. You've essentially reached
Yes.
level of stabilization. They're trying to race you down, but
Yeah.
you've reached an inflection point. Now healing yourself and dragging out the game 8 damage to base is pretty good. But if
Right.
you're losing, you haven't stabilized yet.
Yes.
It's not helping.
I mean that's sort of the tension is are there enough circumstances where buying yourself another turn or two out of Redemption is going to be worth it? Maybe. I don't know. My gut says no, but that's the point. That's why people are bad at card evaluation, is that we can use these same rubrics and we can come up with different ideas. And for me, for right now, I do not like Redemption because it smells like life gain. But I am happy to be convinced otherwise.
Okay. So last the what I would have started with for the sake of the acronym, we have
Yeah.
the T in towel. You're not sure if you're winning or losing. You need a card to give you the win, to turn
Yeah.
the game in your favor. What do those good cards look like?
These are cards that you draw and you feel happy about, right? Like you generally just imagine you're drawing cards off the top of your deck. You see it, great, feeling good. So sometimes this comes in the form of cards with repeatable abilities. Fett's Fire Spray, for example, I think has a really powerful repeatable ability where you're spending a couple of resources to exhaust a non-unique unit. How useful exhausting a non-unique unit is maybe questionable. There's
Not that
a
I
lot of uniques out
derive
there.
joy in your suffering, but when
Yeah.
you played Fett's
That
Fire
was-
Spray tonight and realized I was just sitting there with Dooku and the Avenger, and
Yeah. I was like, oh man, I'm going to stabilize. This is going to be great. I got Fett's Fire Spray. Going to just tap down your board. Boop, 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 boop. No.
I think there's a
Yeah.
couple like tiny mental shifts, and it's something I want to
Yeah.
kind of revisit, but in a future episode. But the idea of unique ships, I think,
Yeah.
our minds as human beings, as apes, immediately recognizes people as
Yes.
unique. Oh, they're not wearing a mask. There's not 4 of them on the card. It's just one prominent person doing a cool thing.
Yeah.
We immediately go to that and say, that's a unique person. But picture of a ship. This ship is special and named. This ship is not.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing for our brains to latch onto. So
Home 1, I think, is another one where it's just big, beefy beefer, and it has Restore 2, and it gives you a card back, right? Like, you immediately get a card back from your discard pile. That's raw card board advantage. Seems good. Pro, you draw home 1, and you've got the resources to play it in a tied
it's a
game.
very big question.
Yeah.
And if you're tied, that requires a
Yeah.
very big answer. So, okay.
Yes. Lando, I think if you're in the more aggressive space and you're tied, where they're coming into play, let's say that Lando is the absolute top of your curve. And I have built decks like this. Is that Lando, you are not playing anything above 6. You have previously resourced some cheap units. You play Lando, you get 2 cheap units back. You're not going to be re-resourcing because Lando was the top of your curve. And so it's just giving you that oomph you need to push through in the board situation where, am I gonna make it?
Swap
or not?
out some good stuff that you threw away early to get
Yeah.
rid of some cheap stuff you've got now.
Maybe, yeah, no. I mean, it's really going to depend on. There's a lot of different uses for Lando. It's powerful. Draw 2 cards is a powerful effect, right?
Okay.
And Lando reads draw 2 cards.
What's terrible when you're
Well, when you
Or
are
sorry, when you're tied. When you're tied.
yeah, when you're tied, cards that just don't move the needle very much. So Super Laser Technician deserves an honorable mention here, along with Resupply. Um, when you play them, you are getting an incremental advantage, and if you're tied, these are cards that are good in the opening. If you're playing them specifically on turn 3, you're playing Resupply, you're playing Super Laser Technician, that's good. But if you're playing...
Is there an implied distinction between the opening and being tied? In a sense,
yes.
the game starts
yes.
with you tied, but we're not talking about that.
The game is the opening is a special circumstance, and that's why we call out its own quadrant.
Okay.
Because a lot of times when you're tied, you're on turn 5 or 6.
The game has progressed.
The game has progressed, right?
Okay.
Another card that I'm going to call out is For a Cause I Can Believe In. In the most recent, in a relatively recent dump of cards, it does a couple of damage to your opponent's base and sets up your subsequent draws, right? Like that's what it does. Right?
But our definition is cards that you're happy to see when you draw.
Right.
A modicum of base damage and setting up a future draw is not. You're just fishing for your actual things that you're happy to see.
Right.
Okay.
I could see For a Cause I Can Believe In if I'm playing an aggressive deck and I need a way to get reach, right? Where we talked about that way back in early episodes. But
there's an argument that you're not necessarily tied, right? Like that's converting winning into a win, right? So
exactly right.
For a Cause I Believe In is a fantastic when you're winning as aggro card. Because it allows you to close.
Yeah. My opponent has just played Obi-Wan. I'm going to have to throw in my whole board to get past him. But wait, I don't. I can, For a Cause I Can Believe In, and just get those last couple of points of base damage through.
So, okay.
The card manipulation is...
If you're playing some sort of mid-rangey red deck, you're tied, all it's doing is getting you to something else. And why not just draw that something else? All right. Let's put that tool in action, Ned. We've got opening, winning, losing, ties. We've had a bunch of recent spoilers. Let's just, instead of just focusing on the quadrant, let's focus on a card, work through the 4 quadrants. First one, Zeb. And I want to say, Ned, welcome to the Zeb fandom, to the Rebels fandom. I believe since the last time we recorded, but definitely since we've launched the show, you are now aware of what Rebels is. My son is a huge Rebels fan, and I remember when we first started playing Swoo, and you were like, who's this Kanan guy? And now you know. So
now I know. Zeb, the Worf of Rebels.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I had not made that connection, but he's the big tough guy who gets beat up to show how tough the other big. He gets
precisely the Worf. Yeah.
Okay. And he's the man. That's gonna make some people angry, but that makes me very happy. Yeah, the Worf of Rebels. So let's talk about Zeb. So we don't want to see him in our opening, right?
He costs 5. No
more
useful.
need to be said. There's no nuance there. He's winning. If you're winning,
Zeb is great. If I am winning, so my opponent has very few units on the board. I'm attacking with Zeb. I get to kill 2 things, right? This isn't Magical Christmas Land. If I'm attacking with a 5 power unit, the odds are that I'm going to be able to kill something, and then, assuming that Zeb doesn't die, you get to kill something else. Now,
and I think
that's
the key
game.
thing is that the winning is the question, because he has to stick around, right? Like Zeb is one of those faux sentinel cards, and that if I'm staring at Zeb, who just got played and is exhausted, I know next turn if I have anything that has 5 or less health but does 4 or less damage, I'm about to just get wiped,
obliterated.
But if I'm winning and I'm playing Zeb, I can maybe ensure that he survives through 1 attack.
Yes.
Okay.
And the other challenge about Zeb, he is good when you're winning, but he's not amazing when you're winning. He helps you to wipe your opponent's board, but he's not going to win you the game right away.
Right.
So
he's
going to
verging into that win more, but he's really a lock, right? He still doesn't push you over, but being able to twofer is just fantastic card advantage. So okay. If you're losing, how do you feel about Zeb?
So when he's got that pseudo sentinel to your point, right? Like you're depending on what part of the game you're losing in and how big your opponent's units are. If they're an aggro player and they're having to trade a couple of units into Zeb so that they don't get obliterated, that feels good. If they're a control player and you're playing Zeb and then they just attack with the Avenger and Zeb dies, feels bad.
Not as good. So that gets into that kind of that, not necessarily white room, but what shell, like he's maybe not so good in certain matchups. But when you're losing, I feel that pseudo sentinel is powerful, but I also feel like you have no way to defend him.
No,
he's just going to get bounced or exhausted, and your host. In a tie, I think this is the one that's interesting. In a tie, I feel good about Zeb.
I feel good about Zeb. If I'm playing Zeb in a tie situation, he is a must-kill threat from my opponent, and that's kind of the definition of a card that is good when you're tied. Is when you play it, does your opponent immediately have to like change their plans to deal with it? Yeah.
So I think this goes to the point that Owl T Towel Quadrant Theory is a first pass, because we've just said that Zeb is somewhere between pretty good and quite, if not amazingly good, in 3 of the 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
I don't know that I feel Zeb is actually good.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like
so he passes the sniff test.
Yes.
But...
Right, and this has to do with the shell that he goes in. If there is a more mid-rangey or controlling red shell, I think
heroism
Zeb,
red shell.
Yeah, heroism red shell. Yes, then I think Zeb absolutely has a home. But the current red shells that I see are extreme aggro, and Zeb as a curve topper doesn't do it for me.
Right. So we need a heroism red mid-range to control shell, and then suddenly Zeb's relative value in a. Right. So that's why we rate him great in a white room, in a vacuum.
Yeah.
But the moment we expose him to what is actually played in his aspects, he's bad. So.
Right.
Okay.
And one other note is that he has the Spectre trait, so he can go into like mid-range Hera decks, where I think that he'll do. It's
maybe the only place you kind of want.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean he has some, I think, value in other decks. I think he can be potent, but yeah. Okay. Rogue Squadron Skirmisher.
Yes.
Obviously bad in the opening. Let's just move on past that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the RSS when winning?
Its stats aren't aggressive. It's got the ambush keyword. Neither of those seems really that attractive. It does draw you a card. It draws you an okay card.
It recurs a card,
It recurs a card, yes. Yeah, so you get to toolbox your discard pile, and hopefully you're looking for a 2-cost event that you like. Right, but that's essentially...
It's got to be a unit. So...
a unit, yeah.
I feel RSS is...
Yeah.
Let's finish the theory. I think it could be good when it's winning, and that ability, the recursion, suddenly drops it down to like 5 or 4 in terms of, card draws maybe worth 1, so we're looking at 5, 4, 6 ambush. That's not bad. So it's pretty good with winning. I want to come back to that.
But you're not closing out the game with it. I don't think that it's good when you're winning. I think that when you're losing, when you're losing though, you can make an argument. It's a 4/6.
Ambush has more value when you're losing because you get to start trading.
Ambush has more value when you're losing. You ambush this in, you're able to knock out one of your opponents. If you can knock out one of your opponent's units with it, that feels good. And recur a card. That feels good.
Which you can then resource, which is one of the like free up if you draw 2 good cards the next round. When you're tied, I also feel
it's pretty good. Yeah.
Like you're trading. If you're tied, there's not an absence of cards. So they have a card, they have units, you have units. Hopefully you trade. And again, I feel like that recur something cheap is of value for. I mean, Goodwin resources is not actually good, but at the same time, when 6 in a
just
green,
card volume matters,
right? Yeah. And 6 in green, you are very likely to still be wanting to resource. You're still wanting to get to 7 or 8, and being able to draw something cheap so that the next turn you draw 2 4+ cards. Yeah. I mean, I love that you don't have to resource one of the 2 cards you just drew.
Yes.
Okay, so kind of pretty good. And I think this, again, goes to what are we missing?
Yeah.
There isn't really a lot of, this kind of belongs, I think, in a vehicle deck or a speeder deck.
Yes.
And we don't have enough heroism vehicles at 2 or less that we are super pumped to see.
Why does Wedge give ambush again?
Right.
Like
So, and
every
+1/+1.
snow speeder that we've seen has been.
Yeah, that's
I
worth
mean,
it.
he goes in a space deck. Yeah, he goes in a space deck is the answer. But
Yeah.
you know,
He's a bit of beef in
yeah.
the ground. So okay.
Yeah.
So we again actually does okay. And I'm getting nervous, Ned, because this card does okay in some of the quadrants. Maybe just okay.
Yeah, it does okay.
And then the context, the meta pushes it down into maybe.
Yeah, and honestly, I when I saw this card, I was excited, and mostly because of the recursion effect. And I think that it is a card to get excited about and to try and think about, can I fit this into a shell?
And there's probably almost certainly a shell for it.
Yeah.
But again, that gets into some of that context of what
But
are you
it's
doing.
not powerful enough to like define an archetype on its own.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a great way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fits
Yeah.
into what the Spark of Rebellion green-white decks are currently trying to do, seeing 2/3 of Spark of Rebellion, but in and of itself doesn't get us pumped. Okay, Inferno 4.
Opening, it's good. It's a 2/3 space for 2. That's good stats.
And that early just stack your deck the way you like it, get cheap stuff on top. I think Inferno 4 just, I mean, it's an ideal
great opening card. Yeah,
So,
beautiful.
Okay. When you're winning,
I don't like it. It doesn't do anything, right? Like it's a fine.
So the Inferno 4 got
rather
me my second Avenger when I won, which is
Okay,
Anacata
all right.
of 1. But I think it's, I mean, when you're winning,
it is
the
less
game is
useless.
It's when you're winning, a 2-cost card is rarely the one that you're super pumped to see, right?
Yes.
If you're up, if you've gone far enough into the game that we're out of the opening and you've established dominance, I think almost any 2-cost card is one you're like, well, it's not the 8-cost card I was hoping for.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's why this one is actually pretty decent when you're winning, because it allows you to, amongst, rated against 2-cost cards, it allows you to look for, get to your big cost cards that you are excited, which is still not good, but we're measuring against 2-cost cards.
Right. It is better than other 2-cost cards when you are winning, but that's not saying a lot.
Fair. So not ideal when you're winning, but it gets more than 0 points.
Losing.
When you're losing.
Dog poop. It's just not. You
It
do not want
presents
to
0 questions.
Yeah.
All it's doing is cycling. I mean, 2/3 in space with a kicker is not awful.
Sure, but if I am losing and I draw this card, my
You've
odds
lost.
of conceding have gone up,
Like,
right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is a segue from losing to lost card.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're tied.
Eh.
I also feel great about it when it's tied. 2/3 in space with a double look at the top cards of your deck. Like, this is getting you, when you are tied, you are top decking, you are looking for questions, you are looking for answers, and this increases the chance that you're going to find it.
It does increase the chance. An old piece of Magic lore is that Scry 2, which is look at the top 2 and put them on the bottom, is effectively equivalent to drawing a card. So if we evaluate it in that context, maybe. I don't know.
You seem
Magic
more
has a
down
lot more
on it
dead
than
cards.
I may be bad at looking at it in a vacuum. I'm definitely looking at
I
it.
think that when it is in quadrants where I am not in the opening, I am not excited to draw this. In the opening, it is good, and in the other quadrants, I am not sufficiently sad about drawing it to disqualify it from including it in my deck.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
I do think a lot of Inferno 4's value is the current state of black villainy or of blue villainy space units at 2.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Like it's the
not good.
queen of
Yeah.
2-cost blue villainy space units. It's as good as it gets.
Yes.
Which is an incredible, but if we define the niche of
Small enough. Yeah.
small enough, anything can be the best. So okay.
Yeah.
So does really great in one quadrant.
But I still think
not-
that like you need to have things in your opening.
Right.
If I'm building a blue villainy deck, you need to have things you're opening. I am probably going to include this card.
It's so good
Yeah.
on that one quadrant. Okay, that's good to note that something
Yeah.
can dominate a singular quadrant and make it into.
Yeah, you want to include cards that are good in certain quadrants because you are going to encounter those quadrants, and you need cards that do things.
Okay.
Everything can't be good everywhere.
Let's do two more. Ruthless Raider.
Another
card that I
six
just-
cost. Yep.
Played and enjoyed.
Yeah.
So
It's
six cost.
Not good in the opening.
Not good. I mean, yeah, we'll just dismiss
Yeah.
that one, right?
Yeah.
When you're winning,
It's
feel
good.
It's good. It's more
Yeah,
base damage.
two
Base
direct-
damage is good.
Yep.
Locking
Yep.
things down is good. 4/6 in
Yep.
space. Pretty good.
Yep. Happy to see. When I'm winning and I draw this card, I generally feel happy.
Yeah.
When-
I can
Yeah.
vouch for that.
When you are losing and you draw this card, I'm not sad. Right?
It's beef.
It's
direct,
beef.
4 direct damage to units.
Yep. I would rather have a different card, but there's the number of cards I would rather have than this is not large, right? I would rather be drawing Palp, assuming that I can play Palp, but this'll do.
This'll do. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I also think it's great in Tide. Tide is exactly
yeah,
where
no.
it excels. I mean,
Yes. Yeah. No, you're doing 2 direct damage to a unit. You're paying for it a little bit on the front end. Like if you compare it to Gladiator Star Destroyer, it's got 1 fewer point of power, but I would rather
but
do
8
2 direct damage.
is also 8 direct damage is
Yeah.
great.
I would rather have this than Gladiator Star Destroyer in a wide variety of contexts.
Yeah, and specifically
Yeah.
when you're Tied,
Yeah.
Gladiator Star Destroyer feels very green, right? Like it's
Yeah.
great when you're losing. This feels great when you're tied. So,
Yeah.
okay, let's do one more recent card, Vanguard Ace, which our first New Republic card.
So
Not good in your
Costs 2.
opening, despite the fact that it costs 2, because if you're playing it in your opening, that's bad.
You're sad.
I mean, 1/1,
yeah, no,
and that does nothing. It's not enough.
yeah. If you compare it to like a comparably stated 2 cost 1/1, the other one draws a card.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or you can get like a
Yeah.
2/3 for 2, right? I mean, you're missing
Yeah.
out on 3 points of stats. So, okay, and
I mean,
that bodes
you
very
can
ill.
play it. Right, you can play it, right? That is the one thing going for it is you can play it in the opening. You are not happy to do that, but you can.
Which still gets more than 0 points in the opening.
Yeah.
Winning, I mean, still doesn't feel like it does anything. You have to dance through a
No.
bunch of hoops to get
Yep.
some decent stats.
Yeah. Yeah, you can maybe get, like, let's imagine that you've got your hand all sculpted. You get to like do your whole thing, play a whole bunch of cards, and you get like a big
3
space
cheese
unit.
tokens
Cool.
plus,
Yeah.
right?
Your
So,
cow makes
Your cow makes more cheese tokens.
Yeah.
No, and that's I think the thing is that you jump through the hoops
Yeah.
to get a 4/4 in space.
Yeah.
That's Magical Christmas Land.
Yeah.
And 4/4 in space does not feel
I mean, let's specifically call this out, right? Like, let's pretend I have 5 resources, right? I have 4 cards in hand, where every turn I've been playing 1 card and drawing 1 card. And I play a 1-cost card, a 1-cost card, a 1-cost card, and then this, right? What are we getting? We are getting a 4/4 space unit, which is worth
well.
approximately
You're getting
4 to
1/1
5
space.
Yeah,
4/4 space unit. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's your Magical Christmas Land.
Christmas Land. It's not. That's
Dream
worth maybe
bigger.
like 4 to 5 resources. Yeah,
Right? Like
no, I'm
dream
not.
bigger. So, okay, I think we agree that even
yeah.
winning, it's not doing enough for you. Losing, man, how are you losing?
Oh, just you. Yeah, you are a sad panda when you draw this.
Yeah, and I mean, somebody's gonna. I mean, I'm happy to play with this. Recap this clip in the future when it's good. But yeah,
Sure. If Storm is an archetype in the future where you're playing like 5 million 0 and 1 cost cards and just going off, and then you drop this, I don't even think it's good then.
right,
Right.
sure. But it could be. It could
You
be.
get a
right,
huge
so-
space unit. Okay.
And if you're tied again,
Yeah.
you're looking for
Yeah.
questions and answers, and this is neither. So this is
Yeah.
Hot Garbo, all 4 quadrants. It gets a
It
point
just-
for being affordable in the opening.
Yep, I think that this is the kind of card that you look at and you start feeling for it, and you have these little dreams about, I'm going to Metal Ceremony, and I'll have drawn a whole bunch of cards, and I'm just going to go hog wild, and I'm going to play this, and it's going to be like a 12/12, and then it never happens.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
since we have some idea of that Vanguard Ace, not good, currently probably not good ever, Space Unit, not providing enough value when played, I think raises one of the more critical questions of this episode, which is, Ned, what is your name?
My name is Monday.
My name is Monday. I'm a mathematician.
So, today we're going to talk about the space tax. FSG has been very clear that they don't expect space units to be comparable quite stat-wise to ground units, especially in the early game. And we have a lot more units now than when I last did this analysis. I've been trying to do this analysis for a while, but we now finally have the point where I feel like we can say something definitive about the space tax. So, it's up on the GitHub, run through the cards up through 1209.
So
that's
when
a
you
little
say
bit
up
out
on the
of date.
GitHub,
Yeah.
I want to make clear for the people who don't
Yeah.
aggressively follow me on Twitter. We are now sharing all of Ned's math on a GitHub. It'll be linked. It's on theforceunlimited.com.
Yep.
Also in the comments of various places that we're posting this. But if you really want to dive into the, I don't know how people do math, but however professional people do math and stats, we've made it available. Please critique.
It's in Python. If you want to redo it in R, be my guest. If you have strong opinions about the way that I'm doing things, feel free to file a pull request, and I will happily listen and or
Please.
ignore your... Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're going to do is we're going to build off of, and in the way that math is iterative, we're going to build off of the prior work that we've done. So we've established that we can regress power and hit points against cost. So that is, we take our power and we take the hit points of units and we compare them to the cost, and we run a linear regression and we get a value. And this value says, for a point of cost, how much power do we buy and how much cost do we buy? So running this regression previously, I got one set of coefficients. Running this again, I get a slightly different set of coefficients, but the truth holds, which is a point of cost. A point of power is worth about twice as much as a point of hit points. One cost worth of unit buys you about 1 point worth of power and 1 point worth of hit points. Caveat, caveat, caveat. But when you add in arena as a factor, so that is, we're treating units that are in the space arena as having 1 point in a stat called arena, and we're treating units that are not in the space arena as having 0 points in a stat called arena. What coefficient do we get for that? And the answer is about the same as a point of hit points. Hit points comes out to 0.376, arena comes out to 0.328. There's a slightly larger error bars on the arena regression. It's about a 5% chance of being a statistical fluke. But
So just so that
and our
for the English literature majors following along at home and me. So you're saying right now that being in space, the space tax is essentially based on our previously discussed power hit point math cost. Being in space is worth 1 hit point.
That is approximately the way it works out.
Pretty close. Okay.
Yeah.
So that if a ground unit gets to have 1 free hit point over a comparable space unit.
That's correct.
Ultimate. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, a common stat line for 2 cost ground units is 2-3. Having a space unit that's also a 2-3 those are slightly better than a comparable 2-3 ground unit.
Yeah, I feel like a fair number of them are unique, or I mean, they're not, or just vanilla, right? Like the 2-3s with abilities seem to mostly be 2-3 for 2s in space. Are unique, and we will hopefully in the future hear how much being unique is worth. So.
Yes, I have a plan. This is part of the analysis. I talk about things when I have the ability to say meaningful things about them. So hopefully there's a graph up here where we can look and see that you'll notice that this regression has been doing something that I've been noticing recently, which I don't like, which is if we look at the error, it's not uniform, where we're missing low-cost units. And if we go back to what I was saying, where we said like a 1-cost unit has approximately 1 point of power and 1 point of hit points, that's not actually true. Most 1-cost units have 2 points of power and 2 hit points. So
Or 4 okay, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah. So we're going to go back to our idea of adjusted stats so that we count. We're using the knowledge that we have that a point of power is worth about, to the designers approximately in this card pool, a point of power is worth about twice as much as a hit point. And then instead of treating cost as just a linear variable, we're going to treat cost like a parabola. So we're going to have a constant. We're going to have a constant term. We're going to have a linear cost term, and then we're going to have a squared cost term. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to essentially weight cheaper units more strongly than expensive units. Essentially, we can give like a little bump to our cheap units compared to our expensive units. And that matches some things that the FFG designers have said, is that they've said cheap units generally, they had to kind of tweak the knob on a little bit because otherwise they just don't get played.
And there's less
Yeah.
wiggle room in cheap units, that the
Yes.
cost is reasonably well defined, mindful of special abilities and so forth, but
Yeah.
that you see less variance in a one
Yeah.
cost across all one cost units than you'll see across all 6 cost units.
Yes.
Okay.
And text is something that I have been working on. We're not able to say definitive things about yet, but a lot of the keyword abilities and a lot of like common abilities I have been able to piece apart a little bit, but we need more units. We need a larger card pool to be able to say more about definitively. So
They're working on
again,
set 9 net. We will get
Yeah.
there. So, okay.
I believe. We're now doing a regression with 4 variables, where our 4 variables are, we have a constant term, that is everything gets a certain amount of adjusted stats. We have a cost-based term, so for every point of cost, you get this much additional adjusted stats. And again, adjusted stats are twice your power plus your hit points. For you take the cost, you square it, and then you multiply it by another term. This is what I call the square cost. And then you have an arena term, where the arena term is, again, 1 if you are a space arena unit, and 0 if you are a ground arena unit. So it's effectively how much does being in the arena being in the space arena cost you in terms of adjusted stats. And what we find is we get our fit to get a little bit better. It doesn't miss those cheap units as much anymore. In fact, it hits them pretty well, and I'm happy to talk. I don't think now is a good time to talk about QQ plots, but I have dreams of talking about my QQ plot for a lot of these regressions.
I want to hear it. Maybe
later.
not the night that I've been drinking for New Year's. So
Yeah, fair. And what we find is that we have a constant adjusted stats term of about 4.4, which says that a 0 cost unit would have about 4.4 points worth of adjusted stats. We'd have a cost term, so that is a 1 cost unit will have 4.4 plus our cost term is 0.8, and then our square cost term is 0.17. So that effectively adds up to, we'd expect a 1 cost unit to have on the order of 5 or maybe 6 points of adjusted stats. And if you look at the number of 1 cost units,
1 cost unit?
6 points of adjusted stats. Remember that in adjusted stats, power counts twice as much as hit points.
Got it,
so
got it,
a
got it.
2/2 unit has an adjusted stat value of 6.
Right, which we would similarly expect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I'm with
Right.
you.
And then there is one more note. The arena term is worth about -1 point of adjusted stats. So that is saying, repeating the analysis that we had previously, if you are in the space arena, it costs you about a hit point, which
Okay.
is exactly what we got in the other analysis. But now our error bars are smaller. We're down to an error of chance of statistical fluke of being about 2%, with an error of 0.3. So out of 1. So it's worth about a hit point plus or minus a third of a hit point in space.
That's and again, we have
Yeah.
a lot of space units and ground units that have abilities, and that's going to futz with the.
And we're not accounting for those yet, but again, that's why I'm taking this approach, is that if we consider all units, generally speaking, our regression is going to try and find the midpoint line of everything. And as we start adding more and more features to it, we're going to get better and better. But those more features cost us in terms of needing a larger sample size in order to be able to say meaningful things.
Okay, so for for 1 resource, you get 6 adjusted stat points.
Stats.
You can
Yes.
spend 1 adjusted stat point to buy 1 HP, to buy the space arena, or to buy 2 adjusted stat points to buy a point
To
of
buy
power.
a point of power.
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
That math tracks, or I follow that. So, okay, awesome. So we know
Another
what
thing that you'll
the
notice is
space tax?
Yep, the space tax is there. Final notes, we got an R squared in the second round of analysis of about 0.897. Remember, R squared goes up to 1, with 1 being a perfect fit. So we're better, but there's still room for improvement. My guess for our next big is going to be adding keywords and keyword-like abilities, which obviously influence the unit's cost, but we haven't looked at.
Okay.
So that is the realist analysis that I can give you at the present.
And that's all she wrote. This was episode 5 of The Force Unlimited. We're recording on December 23rd. Happy Festivus. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Dear listener, if you have any thoughts about the episode, please feel free to reach out, podcast@swootybee.com. Ned, do you have any thoughts about the episode?
I certainly do. If this is our New Year's Eve show, does that make me Dick Clark?
I hope so, but I hope that doesn't make me Ryan Seacrest. Okay, with that, dear listener, we will see you in 2 weeks.